Hey everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. This one is on the biggest blunders from the best players. And I want to thank our sponsor who's actually watching live. This is sponsored by Joel and Margaret McIntyre. And this lecture is dedicated to their daughter Daisy, who is new to chess. Blunders by great players show it is okay to make mistakes and still be great. And that is correct. Everybody blunders and everybody makes mistakes. And one of the quickest ways to improve your chess is to not do anything that you may think you need to do, like learn openings and learn middle games and, get better at things that you can study. One of the best ways to get better at chess is to blunder less. And it's impossible to never blunder, as you will find out. And all the greatest players who ever lived have made all the worst blunders. And the reason they're better than me and you is they don't blunder every single move or very often. But when they do blunder, they're in trouble. So let's say you're rated 12, 1300 and you blunder. Probably very few people on earth know about this. However, when you're one of the best players in the world, if not the best player in the world, and you blunder and you lose the game in one move, then the whole world knows about it. And they know about it forever. And in fact, I have a game from a world championship match played in 1892. So if you blunder in 1892, we're still going to show you. If you're a famous player. So the stronger you are, the more famous your blunders are because they're so rare. And if you can blunder less, just a little less than you normally do, then you can get better at chess because you won't make moves that affect the result of the game so much. It'll be more likely it's a series of moves made by the opponents that decide who wins the game rather than just one move. But when super GMs do it, it's interesting. Okay, a lot of people think Magnus Carlsen is the greatest player who ever lived, and definitely the best player in the world for at least the last 10 years. And this was played in a Blitz tournament in 2006, when he wasn't the world champion yet, but he was still much higher rated than his opponent. His opponent was Merab Gagunashvili. And if you play a lot of chess and you travel a lot, you should know if somebody's name ends in Vili, then they're from Georgia, but not the Georgia that I live in. They're from the former Soviet Georgia. And obviously Gagunashvili is Georgian Grandmaster. This was played in the World Blitz Championship. Okay, we're going to start here. I start at different points in the games, but I'm not going to show you any whole games. I'm just going to show you the blunders because that's what we're here for. Okay, obviously it's White's move because if it was Black's move, Black would promote to a queen with checkmate. So then there ain't going to be any blunders. It's just Black checkmating White. So Carlsen played the best move. King takes g2. And now White is a pawn ahead. Gagunashvili played c2 check. This position, with correct play, should probably end in a draw because Black's king is going to come to the 6th rank and White's king is going to be on the 1st rank, not very strong. So Carlsen knew if he played king g1 that his opponent would play king g3, threatening checkmate, and then White would probably move his king again. So he correctly played king f1. Gagunashvili played king g3. Now Magnus was probably worried Black would promote the pawn, since White's king has nothing to say about it. So he took the pawn, and Black took on f3. And I could have started here, but I wanted to give you guys a run-up of what happened. And in this position, Magnus forgot the most important thing in chess. And the most important thing in chess is checkmate. And instead, Magnus was very concerned about his e4 pawn. So unfortunately for Magnus, he played the move e5. And you can't get much more big of a blunder than hanging checkmate in one when there's like no way to lose. But he found a way to lose. If White doesn't want to lose, White could play rook f5 check, or rook h3 check, or king e1, or king g1, and in all four cases, the game would end in a draw. But he played e5, and he got mated in one move. And I'm sure he was embarrassed, because a blunder, by definition for me, is a move that you know is bad. And it could be a blunder for some players, isn't necessarily a blunder for another player. However, in this particular case, probably if anybody played the move e5 and allowed mate, they would consider that a blunder. So this is a sort of a simple blunder from possibly the greatest player who ever lived. So that happens, and it happens a lot more in blitz chess, and that's why, from a spectating point of view and a kibitzing point of view, people like to watch blitz chess more than slow chess. One is because there's more action. You're not sitting there for 10 minutes waiting for a move. And the other is there's more blunders, there's more decisive results, and when you're a lower ranked player, it's fun to see higher ranked players blundering, because it makes you feel not so bad about yourself when you blunder. And it makes you feel like maybe I could beat Magnus Carlsen. If he's going to blunder mate in one, then I could win. Okay. The next blunder is actually pretty famous. I remember when it happened, and it happened 31 years ago. And this is a game between Larry Christiansen, American Grandmaster, and Anatoly Karpov. Again, one of the greatest players who ever lived. I put him in my top 5, and probably most grandmasters will put him in the top 10. Maybe not the top 5, but I put him in the top 5. And Karpov has the black pieces. And in this position, Christiansen played bishop f4, and that's a nice bishop on f4. And Karpov decided, I don't like that bishop on f4, so he played knight h5, attacking the bishop. Christiansen has to move the bishop away, so he did. And now Karpov continued with his plan of controlling f4. Since his knight controls f4, he wouldn't mind playing knight f4 later, although can't now. So he developed a piece and attacked f4 again. He played bishop to d6. And that way, later in the game, he could play bishop f4 or knight f4. And he developed his bishop. Nice diagonal. Looks pretty good. And unfortunately for Karpov, that's a blunder that you would see in almost any tactics book. And it's way too easy for somebody like Karpov to make. And this was not a blitz tournament. This was one of the most important slow tournaments of the year, the tournament in Wijk on Zee, which I think now is sponsored by Tata Steel. But it's had different sponsors throughout the years, but it's always at the same location in the Netherlands. This is a tournament where everybody's rated 2,700 and 2,600, and it's a slow chess, and it's one of the 3, if not the strongest tournament every year on the calendar. So we should expect very high-level play, and you don't expect an American who's probably, in 93, he was probably the 3rd or 4th best American, to beat Karpov, who's usually the world champion. And if you've never seen this before, this is actually pretty cool. This is a cool blunder. And I teach this kind of blunder to my students and in classes. I teach them about loose pieces. And in this position, the bishop on d6 and the knight on h5 are not protected. The other black pieces are protected, or they're very far away. And when you see pieces on the 4th and 5th row that are not protected, that's like a blunder alert. Like maybe there's a blunder going on. And since this isn't protected and this isn't protected, if we could somehow attack both of them, then we would win a piece. And in this position, if you want to attack both pieces that are very far away from each other, that are on different colors, one's on a dark square and the knight's on a white square, it has to be with a queen. A knight, bishop, or pawn's not going to do it. I guess if we cheated, we could put a rook here, which would fork, but that rook would be hanging. So even if I cheat, I don't win. But we do have a queen. And there is one square on the board in this position the queen can go to that attacks the bishop and the knight. And Christiansen played queen d1. It's very difficult to see retreats as being an aggressive move. Most people aren't worried about retreats. Like, oh no, he retreated. And I actually teach my students that too, that if you can play a strong retreat, probably your opponent didn't look at it because they weren't afraid of it. Well, now Karpov loses a piece. He can save his knight, or he can save his bishop, but he can't save both. So in this position, even though it was like move 12 or 13, Karpov resigned, losing a piece for nothing. Not something Karpov's going to do often, but when he does do it, then it's famous. So. Okay, let me push F11 again. I forgot what to do. Okay, this is a game between two of the most famous and greatest players of our time. Garry Kasparov is white, and Vladimir Kramnik is black. This was played in Novgorod in 1994, and you could argue in 94, those guys were like at the peak of their strength. 94, that's when Kasparov and Kramnik were really good. And in this position, Kasparov played relatively obvious bishop takes e6. And I think if both sides play perfectly, white should win. Should. But, you know, black has drawing chances. Black's only down one pawn. However, after one of the biggest blunders of his life, and Kramnik makes our list twice today, he loses everything. So it's not easy to do. In fact, if I asked you to do it, you might have trouble doing it. In this position, Kramnik lost his queen. And obviously, if you lose your queen on purpose, like queen e5 or queen f4, queen d4, I mean, you can lose your queen on purpose. But he didn't lose it on purpose. He lost it by accident. That's why it's a blunder. Probably there's some solace in thinking, well, I probably would have lost the game anyway. So I mean, if he was winning, it would be a worse blunder. But still, it's for Kramnik, it's a crazy blunder. He played the move queen f8. And, you know, black's king is a little dangerously placed, so he wanted to trade queens. And if the white queen moves away somewhere, maybe I could take on f2 or play queen f4 check. And if we trade queens, maybe black can draw the ending down a pawn. Maybe. Unfortunately for Kramnik, Kasparov has a move that wins instantly, and queen f8 is the kind of blunder that I would expect like in a Blitz game or a bullet game, not in a really important slow tournament. And this is removing the defender and attraction. The king is defending the queen. If the king wasn't defending the queen, we would take the queen for free. And Kasparov has a simple move which removes the defender, the king. Kasparov played bishop d7 check. And that's that. Now, if this was a Blitz game between two 1,300 players, that would be reasonable. But it's a slow game between probably the two best players in the world, and black just gave his queen away. which is not, I mean, I can't show you that too often, although in this lecture I can. Since there's millions and millions of chess games played, I can get about a dozen where somebody hung a queen or hung mate when they're 2,800. And now Kramnik resigned. His only legal move is to take the bishop, and then you lose your queen. So that's a pretty poor move, queen f8. That's not his biggest blunder ever, but it's close. Luckily, I have his biggest blunder ever. Hopefully Kramnik's not watching this video, but maybe Kasparov is. And he's like, I remember playing bishop d7. Why'd that guy hang his queen? And, for these guys, their living is playing chess. They're world champions. They're making 6-7 figures a year playing in chess tournaments. They beat everybody. They're higher rated than everybody. So it's not a good feeling when you're a professional chess player and then you hang your queen and lose. And I had this discussion with a friend of mine a long time ago. He was arguing with me. He's 1900. He says, when he blunders and I blunder, we both feel equally bad. Like, low-rated players don't want to blunder either. And I said to him, when you blunder, you go home and you're mad. When I blunder, I don't get to eat or pay rent. So me blundering is worse. So you could imagine if somebody who spent their whole life playing chess and all they do is play chess for a living, if all of a sudden they started blundering and they didn't win any games anymore, got to find a new profession. So it's weird when somebody as good as Kramnik misses something as easy as bishop d7 for somebody like him, but it happens occasionally. When it happens in slow tournaments, it's pretty rare. But everybody blunders. Okay, this one is actually funny, and it's funny because it didn't happen to me. If it happened to me, then it wouldn't be funny. White is Peter Heine Nielsen, and nobody knows this, including Peter Heine Nielsen. But I played him when we were both very young. I was 19 or 20, and maybe he was 17 or 16. And we played in France, and I actually beat him, but I was higher rated than him, and he was totally unknown. Now, he's not totally unknown. He's been working with Magnus Carlsen for many years. His FIDE rating went to 2650 and even higher. He was one of the top 100 players in the world. And this game was played in the B group of Wijk from 2005. Black is a very famous player, Sergey Karjakin. He's famous for 3 reasons. One of the reasons he's famous now is he seems to support Russia, and so a lot of chess players don't want him to play in tournaments anymore because he's actively backing Russia in the war. So he's sort of like persona non grata for most other chess players. The other thing that's funny is he played a world championship match with Magnus Carlsen, and they tied the match, and then they had a playoff, like rapid playoff, which Magnus won. And Karjakin at the time, but not now, at the time was the youngest grandmaster of all time. And that record was broken about a year or 2 ago. So he was the youngest grandmaster ever for a very long time. Something like 12 years and 11 months or something. So Karjakin's a pretty famous chess player. This is a very late in the game. They're on move 99-100. And White's been trying to win because White has 2 pieces for a rook. But it's not easy to win. Okay, so Karjakin's playing for a draw. And the game could go another 50 moves. And this game, at this point, I would guess, has been going for 6.5, 7 hours. So if you want to see a grandmaster blunder, if the game's been going for 7 hours, that's probably a good time to see it because the players are exhausted. Okay, so Karjakin played rook a1, activating his rook. And Peter Heine Nielsen played knight b3. And I guess this is the worst move Karjakin's ever made. I mean, knight b3 pretty obviously attacks the rook, or so I thought. And Karjakin didn't move his rook, which is a bad idea. He played the move king g5. Can you imagine trying to draw for 100 moves and being close to drawing, and then you just hang your rook? And that's the kind of blunder I expect from very new players. I mean, like people who just learned the game probably less than a year ago, that they would make such a blunder where the knight would move and attack their rook, and they just don't see it, and then they're like, oh, my rook, darn. And, you know, for Karjakin, it's a really bad feeling to play so many hours of chess, and then it's just one game, and then you make a move and the game's over. And this reminded me of something I've discussed when I teach chess camps. We never came to a conclusion, but you guys can discuss in the chat, in the comments. Would you rather lose a game in like 10, 15 moves, which is embarrassing, in like 3 minutes? Or would you rather lose a 100-move game, you know, in like 7.5 hours? I mean, like you're trying for hours and hours not to lose, and then you make a blunder and lose. So you feel like you wasted the whole game because you were trying so hard that game to miss something that's so elementary. However, there's a lot of examples of it when you get to the end of the game and people are exhausted. Okay, now this game I did not know before today. This is a game between Tigran Petrosian, also world champion, and David Bronstein. Bronstein played a world championship match with Botvinnik, which they tied 12-12, and the rules at the time was the world champion retained his title. So Bronstein was never world champion, but he was as close as you can get. And in fact, after like 21 or 22 games, he was ahead. And then he lost game 23, and Botvinnik tied the matchup. So Bronstein, pretty famous player. And Petrosian is famous for not blundering. Petrosian, very solid player, very good at tactics, and he just, he's not going to blunder. Now in this position, if you're a grandmaster like me, and you're not, but you could be, but probably not, you will really hate Black's position because all of White's pieces are great and all of Black's pieces are terrible, except for the knight on d4. That's pretty good. But you have an isolated pawn, which my knights are surrounding. You have this backward pawn that your rook and bishop are going to defend the rest of the game. My knights control every square in your position. This bishop on c8 can't move. It's just a terrible strategical position for Black, which is not surprising because Petrosian was a strategical genius, okay? And he was world champion because he played so well. Petrosian played a very aggressive move, queen d6. I don't think there's a big threat, but, it's annoying when your opponent's queen is all up in your position. So Bronstein decided, I should kick out that queen. I don't like that queen there. Get out of here. And Bronstein played knight f5. And so I can't explain this blunder because there's no time trouble. It's a candidates tournament. So, like, the winner of this tournament plays for the world championship. It's the most important tournament there is. You can't have a more important tournament. Whoever wins this tournament plays whoever the world champion is. In 56, I guess that would be Botvinnik. Hope I'm right. Otherwise, I'm going to hear about it in the chat. Okay, so White's queen is attacked, and White has many moves to move the queen to safety, but for reasons I don't understand, Petrosian didn't notice. Even though that was Black's last move. Black played knight f5, attacking his queen. So Petrosian ignored it, and not only did he lose his queen, it doesn't matter at the grandmaster level, but the queen's defended by the knight. So if it was Black's move, Black would win a queen for a knight, which, that's winning. But Petrosian played knight g5, undefending his queen, obviously missing his queen was attacked. So then he lost his queen. Now, in a candidates tournament to decide who plays for the world championship, that's possibly the biggest blunder of all time. Because this is the most important tournament to determine who the world champion is. So usually you don't miss knight takes queen. So that's Petrosian's worst blunder for sure. He didn't blunder very often, and I'm surprised I didn't know about this because it was before today, because this was in a candidates tournament. And then as an aside, since I'm giving the lecture, so if I wasn't giving the lecture, I wouldn't tell you this, but I've played Bronstein a few times when he was, elderly. He wasn't top player in the world. And I beat him once in a game where around move 40, 45, he hung his queen, and I took his queen. It was the same as this. And then after the game, he said he's never hung his queen before. So, well, he did then. So the truth hurts. Okay, so hanging your queen happens sometimes. Okay, and this is a very famous blunder, which I've known for a long time. There's a very famous book written by Bronstein on the candidates tournament in 1953. The name of the book is Zurich 53. And all the best players in the world played. And the winner of the tournament would go on to play Botvinnik for the world championship. This was the candidates tournament before the previous one, the previous game I showed you from 56. And this is between László Szabó from Hungary and Samuel Reshevsky. Reshevsky played in many candidates tournaments. He played for the U.S. Olympic team many times. He won many U.S. championships. And most people think when he was active, which was a long time, he was top 5 or top 10 in the world. And this position, White has an advantage. And Szabó played the move knight f6 check. And here, Black has two legal moves. Black can take the knight, or he can play king h8. And Reshevsky did not choose wisely. And this is actually what's called a double blunder. It doesn't mean I blunder a queen and then you blunder a queen. A double blunder is when one side blunders and the other side doesn't see it. So it's like nothing happened. And actually at the lower ranks, this is very common. It's less common at the higher ranks, but when it happens, it's funny because these guys are supposed to be the best players in the world playing in a candidates tournament, and that one guy blunders horribly and the other guy doesn't see it. And some have argued, and this is what Szabó said after the game. They said, why didn't you win? And he said, when you're playing Reshevsky, you don't assume your opponent blundered. You just think they're playing normal moves. You don't look for wins because Reshevsky's not blundering. Well, Reshevsky did blunder. He took the knight. And in this position, White actually has checkmate in 2 moves. And if he had played move 1, Reshevsky would have resigned, and this would have been a famous blunder. However, Szabó did not see the mate in 2, and now it's a famous double blunder. And even though Szabó had the advantage after the move he played, he did not win. The game ended in a draw. Okay, so hopefully you've seen this before, and hopefully you've done this before. And when I give simultaneous exhibitions, and I've given 3 in this month, which is very strange, this happens occasionally. I get to play this tactic. And I get to play it more than Szabó does because I'm playing club players in a simul and he's playing world candidate players. And he played the move bishop takes bishop, the obvious move. Then Reshevsky traded on d5, and eventually the game ended in a draw, even though white's better. Instead, Szabó could have won the game immediately with queen takes g6 check. And the f pawn is pinned. I've done this several times. I've played queen g6 check, or with black, the equivalent queen g3 check when the f pawn is pinned. Now, if you play king h8, bishop takes f6 is mate, and if you play bishop g7, queen takes g7 is mate. So after queen g6, black would have resigned, but neither player saw queen g6, and then the game ended in a draw. So that's a pretty famous double blunder from such an important tournament from such strong players, is not to see queen g6. And if you're wondering, why didn't white play queen g6 earlier? Because of the starting position, white's knight was on e4, so it wasn't a threat. But by playing knight f6 check, now he can play queen g6. That's why black should play king h8. And now the f pawn isn't pinned, so we don't have queen g6 anymore. And then it's a normal position. Probably better for white. Okay, this one I don't understand. But I guess I don't understand any of them. The only thing I can say is everybody blunders all the time. White is Surya Ganguly, and if you're Indian and you play chess, you know who that is. He's one of the top 10, 15 players in India for the last 15 years. And more famously, he's been coaching Anand in some world championship matches. He's part of the team. And he's playing a player whose name I can't pronounce, so you know he's good. Mukhiddin Madaminov. And this was in the 2023 FIDE Rapid World Chess Championship. So it's not a blitz game. If it was a bullet game where both sides started with a minute, I could understand. And you'll notice the game just started. This is like move 6 or 5. Okay, and in this position, Ganguly made the worst blunder you can make. If I was white, I would probably play bishop e2, I guess. But Ganguly took the knight on e5, expecting black to recapture on e5. And there's a famous game played in this creators chess tournament where people who aren't chess players, but they're famous on Twitch, they play a chess tournament, and the same kind of mate happened very early in the game. I think Critical had black and white was maybe XQC. I think it was XQC versus Critical. But the same mate happened, but those people don't play chess for a living, and they don't work with Anand in the World Championship match, so I expect them to make mistakes. And black just played queen takes f2, checkmate. And you see that a lot at kids tournaments, at beginner tournaments, but you don't see it a lot in the World Rapid Chess Championship, on move 6. Just unheard of. And then after this game, Anand fired Ganguly. Well, maybe not. Although he'd be justified. So he played knight takes e5 and got mated and won. So not pretty bad blunder for somebody so strong, so well known, and it wasn't a blitz game. White had plenty of time on the clock. These things happen. Okay, this was played in 1892 between Mikhail Chigorin and Wilhelm Steinitz in the World Championship match. And this is pretty embarrassing. So white's up a piece. So white's winning. White's up a piece. And black has no threat. So, if this game was played today in a World Championship match, I think black would have resigned already. Because Don't see guys playing down a piece in a world championship match when there's no compensation and there's no threat. And there were a lot of blunders in this match, but this might be the worst one. So a friend of mine told me he does this a lot, this kind of blunder. His opponent makes a threat, then he stops the threat. Then his opponent makes a random move, and then he forgets about the threat because he stopped it. So then he moves away what he just did to defend against the threat. And in this position, it looks like black is threatening rook h2 check, but he's not because there's a bishop on d6. So black has no threat. And white has an extra knight. And he played after rook d2, which attacks the d pawn, he played the move bishop b4 attacking the rook. And yeah, that's not good. Not only is that not good, I don't understand why he allowed rook takes d5, but okay. And he thought, I'm attacking the rook, and the rook's going to move away. But he forgot, Chigorin did, that his bishop was defending h2. And now it's not. So now rook h2, and Chigorin resigned, because if he plays king g1, then that's mate. And again, if club players were playing a blitz game or beginners, then bishop b4 is sort of a normal move. That happens, you blunder. But world championship match, when you're up a piece for nothing and you just hang checkmate, that's not very common. But it does give you credence for one of my favorite sayings, which is never resign. Because your opponent could do anything. Just one bad move can ruin everything. And I guess Steinitz was glad he didn't resign earlier, because instead of losing a piece down, he won. And the final score of the match in 1892 was 10 wins for Steinitz and 8 wins for Chigorin. So if everything else was the same, they would have had 9 wins each. So, I mean, that blunder was pretty important for deciding who the world champion was. And that's a pretty bad blunder, just hanging checkmate when black isn't threatening it. And you just sort of undefend what they were doing. Okay, this might be the last one, but I've been wrong before. And this is definitely one of the funniest ones. This is a match played when it wasn't clear who was better, computers or humans. So the best computers would play the best humans, and sometimes the humans won, and sometimes the computers won. This was in 2006. Now, in 2024, we don't do that. And if we do that, we have like the engine is spotting like 2 pawns or a knight. And, if you just play it heads up with no spot, then the engine's going to beat any human. So they don't do that anymore. But in 2006, it was still interesting to see an engine play a top human. So this is Deep Fritz versus Kramnik, part of their match. In this position, it's relatively obvious, that white is threatening queen h7 checkmate. And the way for black to stop that is to play king g8, which not only stops checkmate, it also attacks the knight on f8. And then I guess black could hope to win because this a-pawn's looking pretty good. So, I don't know what would have happened. In some alternate universe, king g8 was played. And Kramnik not only blundered, but he thought he was winning. He actually made the move and got up, and he was like, I know I'm winning now. And he played queen e3. So I don't know why Kramnik didn't see queen h7 mate. Kramnik should see that. And the idea is black wants to trade queens, and if white doesn't trade queens, black can play like queen e1 checkmate. And if we trade queens, which was what Kramnik thought was going to happen, then that a-pawn's pretty good. Black is going to win. So Kramnik played queen e3 and got up and was walking around, and he came back to the board and he was in checkmate. So queen h7 mate. So that's funny. After playing well the whole game and getting close to a winning position, he just hangs like a really obvious mate in one, making our list twice. Very good, Kramnik. So best players in the world champions, future world champions, former world champions, they're hanging checkmate, they're hanging their queen, they're blundering pieces to one movers, because that happens. And the better you are at chess, the more famous your blunder is. And when I started this lecture earlier today, and I was finding games that I liked, I had a lot of my own games in mind, and there were just too many where I would make a move that I'd have to resign. And I was like, I'm not a great player. I'm like an okay player. Let's make fun of the world champions, not an average grandmaster, because I'm blundering a lot more than they are, and I remember. So if I blundered 20, 30, 40 years ago, I can find that game real quick, because it sticks in my brain, the blunders that I've made. And I think for players of this caliber, they must be remembering it also, like their whole life, that they wake up and they're like, oh yeah, 22 years ago I hung mate in one. Why did I do that? And you don't know. I think that was the last one. No, there's more. I remember this too, and I forgot about it. Capablanca, who's one of the greatest players of all time and was world champion for many years, he's playing Friedrich Samish, which is funny because this is a Samish Nimzo Indian, named after Samish. So, and this was played a tournament in 1929 when Capablanca was probably the best player in the world, although Alekhine was world champion. But in my household, when I grew up, Capablanca was better than Alekhine because my dad said so. Anyway, in this position, Capablanca made one of the worst blunders of his career with the black pieces. Just a normal Nimzo Indian Samish position. Black could play any move. He played bishop a after bishop d3. Capablanca played bishop a6. Bishop a6 walks into a relatively obvious fork, which is also a pin, and it just wins a piece for nothing. So bishop a6 is a real, not a move a grandmaster would make, and Capablanca, world champion, probably the best player in the world at the time, not making moves like bishop a6 very often. Samish played queen a4, and it's obvious black's losing a piece. There's only one way to save both of your pieces. You can't play knight a5 because it's pinned. So you have to play bishop b7, and then d5 just wins the knight. The knight's pinned. So bishop a6 is a terrible blunder, and Capablanca, unlike a lot of the games that we've seen today, he didn't give up. He knew he was losing a piece, but he just played down a piece. And he eventually lost, but it was like 62 moves. But, if you blunder on move 10 and the game ends on move 62, most people don't know you blundered on move 10. However, if you blunder on move 10, then resign, everybody says, hey, you lost in 10 moves. Let me see. I want to see that game. That actually happened to me. I blundered on move 10 and I resigned. But if I had played to move 30 or 40, just completely losing the rest of the game, maybe the game wouldn't be so well known. But I don't care about that. But maybe Capablanca did. Or maybe Capablanca thought, this guy's no good. I'll win down a piece. Even though Samish was one of the top 20 players in the world. So that didn't work out. So bishop a6, probably the worst blunder Capablanca's made, just losing a piece to an obvious fork. And he ended up losing the game. And I think that's the only game he ever lost to Samish. And they asked Friedrich after the game, do you mind winning this way? Not outplaying your opponent, and playing a brilliant game, but the guy just hangs a piece for nothing? And his response was, it's all the same-ish to me. That's based on a true story, except for the true story part. Anyway, I want to thank again our sponsors, Joel and Margaret McIntyre. It's dedicated to their daughter, Daisy. Don't worry, Daisy. I was blundering before you were born. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, please contact my wife, Karen. Her email is karen@atlchessclub.com, and we can find a nice topic like we had today on the best players in the world blundering mate, blundering their queen, blundering all their pieces, and still, they're the most famous chess players who ever lived. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.